Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui coming to you from Singapore. The maritime expansion of China and the re-emergence of the country are fast becoming the most magnificent factor that is profoundly changing the world's economic and political landscape. Is the United States ready for the change? Could such changes cause clashes? Professor Huang Jing, head of the Institute on Asia and Globalization with the National University of Singapore, says a strong nation should have a sense of humility and should promote predictability about its own behavior. He made the remarks in the context of the just concluded Shangri-La Security Dialogue in Singapore, which has been proud of being a neutral broker on regional issues. Welcome to Dialogue, Professor Huang.
Thank you.
What do you think will be the political fallout of the imminent outcome for the international arbitration of The Hague on the issue of the South China Sea?
First, of course, it will be a hoopla in international media, especially in the Anglo-Saxon media, because after all, the kind of discourse was dominated by the Western media. And given that it is indeed a judgment made by the International Tribunal, and also China has always said it is an important part, a constructive part of international system. So China is in a weaker position because the tribunal itself, its judgment itself, is legitimate. Even though the Philippines' way, the move to bring this case to the International Tribunal is very questionable. So therefore, China will be on the defensive. That's the first problem. And secondly, because we know that international law, although it is highly cherished by all the members of the international community, does not have constitutional foundation. More importantly, no sovereign countries will accept the judgment or ruling by the International Tribunal regarding the sovereignty and the territory dispute. So therefore, China will say, look, we understand how this outcome, but it will not affect fundamentally or substantially anyway about the dispute or the territory dispute between China and the Philippines.
Let's look at the possible solutions or options on the table. Now, China says it prefers to adopt the DOC instead of a COC. China says it could enjoy more margin, do more political maneuvers within the broad framework of the DOC. And the COC, well, China is very cautious about it. Why do you think China has a strong mixed feeling?
No, I think that first China's position is that COC is a continuity of DOC. Because at the very beginning, China and ASEAN countries want to find a solution. And the more they negotiate and talk to each other, the more they realize it is unlikely to find a solution because it's a territory dispute involving China and the 4 member countries of ASEAN. So therefore, they decided to have a memo. That memo is a DOC. DOC has 3 principles. First principle, of course, no one can unilaterally change status quo. And second, everybody agree or acknowledge at least that there is a dispute. So therefore, dispute has to be solved peacefully through negotiation, not by force. Last but not the least, all the participants of DOC agree after 2002, because DOC was announced in 1992. After 2002, they're going to continue the negotiation, try to reach so-called COC, the Code of Conduct. But in between, China said 3 things happened. First, some member countries unilaterally changed the status quo. That is, the Vietnam and the Philippines and other countries began to reclaim land on the rocks they occupied first. And second, Philippines has unilaterally decided to go to international tribunal, which is also a violation of DOC. Last but not the least, there is a massive involvement of a foreign country, that is United States, in the South China Sea. That is also make DOC impossible. So China's position is not China is against the COC. China said COC should be continued under the foundation, under the base of DOC. But I believe now China has kind of changed, even low-profile Chinese position. I believe Chinese leaders realized that it serves China's interest for China to actively or even proactively engage in the negotiation of COC. But China has 2 principles. The first, that COC is for management, not for solution. In other words, COC tells us how we should behave in South China Sea, but COC does not, should not, and will not provide any solutions to a territorial dispute, because that has to be done between the claimant countries, first. And second is that China has to participate from day one. That is, China will not allow the 10 member countries of ASEAN to reach agreement or consensus first and then come to talk to China. China said, no, at the very beginning, we should sit at the table of COC. So that's our two fundamental principles. And now I think China, I believe, is already engaged other countries in the COC negotiation.
Professor Huang, there are many issues concerning the South China Sea, and one focus in dispute is militarization. The United States accused China of endangering the freedom of navigation and the freedom of overflight. China says, no, it's you whose patrols of the waters threaten to endanger our sovereignty, so on and so forth. Here is the standoff between Washington and Beijing. What do you think of militarization?
First, as a militarization, how you define it. If you define militarization as you put any weapons on the spot, that's militarization. That's first definition. If we go for this definition, and China can absolutely not do anything in South China Sea. But another definition is that, yes, everyone deserves the right to defend itself. So for defensive purpose, if I put weapons on the places that belongs to me to defend my own security and safety, then that's fine, that's not militarization. But if I put offensive weapons in the place, and the purpose I put offensive weapons in that area is to attack others, and that is not allowed. So first, what is a definition of militarization? Right now, obviously, that inconsistency, if not contradictory in this. You cannot say, okay, you cannot do whatever military operation in the region. If you do it, it's militarization. And I can do whatever I want, because I'm the one who guarantors the international peace and stability. Then I can do whatever I want, then that is. So there are two issues. Number one, how you define it. Number two, do I have a universal standard or have a bystander or double standards? That's an issue. And another issue which I mentioned about the freedom of navigation. Again, first we have to define the term to see if we're on the same page. Of course, no one has a freedom to navigate or to fly in other people's territory. So if this is my territory, you don't have a freedom to come in. You should have my agreement or approval. But if it's international territory or international space or international water, everybody has a freedom to go. So in that regard, then the sub-issue is that in the international space, in the international territory, should we have certain limitations or constraints on the military vehicles to fly? And of course, the United States said, look, if it's international space, if it's national water, United States military can also operate, which is true because the United States is a global cop, and the United States does have a commitment and responsibility to maintain peace and stability. That's a fact. In the past 70 years, the United States has taken major responsibility to keep peace and stability in the region, although it's in US term. For example, Strait of Malacca is important for all of us, but no one has soldiers here. It's the United States who is doing that. We accept, I think China should accept and acknowledge this reality. But the issue is that, do you have that kind of freedom of military operation in the water close to me, especially in the 200 miles? That's where the agreement
There is indeed a broad recognition on the side of the Chinese that the United States has been the architect of the security structure in the Pacific Ocean, I mean in the Asia-Pacific region. However, do you think the alleged expansion of our maritime features in the South China Sea threaten to disrupt the regional order that was established by the United States since the end of the Second World War? Does that mean that inevitably there's going to be a collision, a head-on collision between the two powers? China wants to be a major maritime power, and the United States has long assumed the leadership in the West Pacific, and therefore many foresee an inevitable collision.
I think, indeed, let's first get the facts right. First, as a Chinese, we should realize that China's rise is the single most significant factor to change the strategic landscape or strategic balance in the region. That's a fact. China's been growing so fast. For example, just 10 years ago, China has very weak or no capability to really manage the South China Sea. Chinese warship cannot come over. Chinese airplane can only fly 800 meters. But now China has more and more power and capability to grow. That fact itself has a changed strategic balance in the region. That's a fact. But the point is, just like you mentioned, will this kind of change will undermine peace and stability that has been maintained in the past decade? That's another issue.
My next question, therefore, is the United States is probably coming to terms with the expansion of China, be it a continental power or maritime power or world trading power. It's a fact. You're right. But the United States is not sure about the strategic intent of China's global expansion.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a zero-sum game, as highlighted by the rivalry between the former Soviet Union and the United States before 1991, or, I mean, there's the issue of transparency about China's military budget and whether China wants to use force to redraw the border. That's the accusation.
No, I think that for the United States, the concern is normal and understandable, because the United States used to be a unipolar world in which United States is dominant. All the rules of game is made in U.S. term. But now China, of course, try to seek a so-called new type of relationship with major countries, and China want to be one of the agenda setter. In other words, China not follow the rules made by others, accepted, of course, by international community, but China won't be part of rulemaking. In that regard, there is a very pure, naked conflicting interest between the two countries. But have conflicting interest does not mean the two countries have to collide with each other, fight each other. Two countries can sit down and talk and then make a compromise. But the issue is in whose term the compromise will be made. And in the South China Sea, in the Western Pacific, of course, usually the balance, the line of strategic balance between the United States and China, like you said, China is a continental power, United States is a maritime power, so the balance is very close to China's shore. It's actually right at China's territory. But now the China become more and more maritime oriented power also. All the global power has to be maritime power in the industrial period. So China will push outside. So there's a balanced line where you have to be pushed out, not just for China's interest, but also for regional peace and stability. Then we have a problem. United States and China will engage each other for long term in this kind of pushback force for the new balancing line. That's the first. And second, there is a problem. That is, as China becomes more and more important, more stronger and stronger, play more and more role in the national peace and stability, China will have to join in the security arrangement in the Asian Pacific. But the problem, because the security arrangements in this region, we call it Asian Pacific, is based on the US-led security alliances, US-Japan alliance, US-Korea alliance, US-Australia alliance, US-Singapore alliance. But the problem is that those alliances were also established during the Cold War period. It is for confrontation, not for cooperation or integration. As a result, institutionally and organizationally, all those alliances are exclusive, not inclusive. Now where China is rising, India is rising, and Russia is re-rising, but all the rising powers are institutionally excluded from the security arrangement led by the United States. That causes a security dilemma, which is both sides try to beef up the military presence. I feel safer. That's the issue, that fundamental issue between the United States and China is how they're going to work with each other, either like the security arrangement now to accept China's participation institutionally, or they rebuild a new architecture for security arrangements. This is a huge challenge.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Professor Huang Jing, Director of the Institute on Asia and Globalization with the National University of Singapore. We'll be back in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Welcome back. What do you think of the issue of the ambiguous, quote-unquote, the ambiguous nine-dash line? The allegation that China wants to take up to 85% of the South China Sea as its own backyard. I mean, this is pretty sensational and generates headlines the world over. China says, wait a minute, this is an issue that's been abused by some of the media. What do you think?
I think first we have to accept 9-dash line or U-shaped line is a historical fact. We know that one of the important foundation for the system in the region or international system architecture region is that all the territory occupied or stolen by the Japanese imperialism will have returned to the original owner or country. But in 1945, when Japan was defeated, at that time, Japan occupied the entire South China Sea. United States fought the bloodiest battle ever, island by island, to defeat the Japanese in South China Sea. And then who the South China Sea should return to? Japanese delinquished its ownership of South China Sea. And at that time, let's keep in mind, in 1945-46, only two countries in the region, China, at that time called Republic of China, and the Philippines. But the Cairo Declaration, Potsdam Declaration, said very clearly that all the territory occupied by Japanese imperial forces should return, and return to, of course, China. That's why in 1946, it is American warship carries Chinese soldier to come to South China Sea to some investigation, named all the rocks and the islands. And at that time, we found out the only island that is habitable, have fresh water, is the Taipingdao. So China put the troops there, and it's still there.
You mean the KMT government put the troops there?
Yeah, so in that survey, they draw 11-dash line. Now it's a 9-dash line. At that time, only two countries has legitimate power or right to accept it or not. One is China. It was drawn by the Chinese. Of course, China accepted. And another is the Philippines.
By the way, why the 11-dash line has become a 9-dash line?
Oh, in 1965, we know there is a historical fact. We know that Vietnam War, the Ho Chi Minh led the northern Vietnamese fighting the American-supported southern Vietnamese. And in return, because of fighting in South Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh and his forces will have to ship the ammunitions, supports, all the material and soldiers from north to south. They usually go by the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail was heavily bombarded by the United States. So another route is by the sea. But by the sea, it will cross 11-dash line into Chinese territory line. So at that time, there is an agreement between Chinese government under the leadership of Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai and Ho Chi Minh that China will compromise 2-dash line so that Ho Chi Minh can use that route to ship its soldiers ammunition to the south. So that's why it became 11-dash line. So that's an example of a cooperation between China and North Vietnam at that time. And that should be a good memory between the two countries. But now, going back, why the 11-dash line becomes so controversial? Because after the national independence movement in 1950 and the 60s, Malaysia became independent, 1957. And in 1975, Vietnam has become a unified country under today's Vietnamese government. And Brunei was independent in 1967. And all of a sudden, all those countries re-established as countries. So their view, the perception, and their understanding of 9-dash line is very, very controversial, different. Because Malaysia, Brunei, all the countries, they deserve a piece of South China Sea. Vietnam, after unification, realized South China Sea is very important to them. And the Philippines also, oh, South China Sea is so important. So all of them began to charge 9-dash line. But the fact remains unchanged. 11-dash line, 9-dash line was drawn in 1946 and was published in 1947 on the map of China. And at 1952 San Francisco Peace Treaty Conference, even though neither People's Republic of China or Taiwan attended the meeting, but no one at that time challenged 11-dash line. People began to charge 11-dash line or 9-dash line only recently because everyone wanted a new peace. On the other hand, of course, Deng Xiaoping himself said there is a dispute because he said sovereignty is China's, but let's shelve the dispute during the development.
That's a very famous
China also
statement.
compromised a little bit.
That is a famous statement.
Yeah, so that's why 9-dash line has become a controversial issue and become a strategically ambiguous line.
Before 1991, when the Cold War came to an end, it seemed the United States had been supportive of China one way or another, despite the conflicts that took place between China and Vietnam, fighting for islands or the border clashes. But why does the United States change its position nowadays. It challenges whatever China makes, including perhaps the construction of a maritime Silk Road, to say nothing of the Belt and Road Initiative, which covers much of the Eurasia continent.
I think that the fact is that China did fight for its territory sovereignty in 1974, 1984, 1988 against Vietnam. In all those three fights, all the international media, including US government, actually, if not support China, they lean towards China. Because at that time, Vietnam is an ally of Soviet Union, and China, of course, is a quasi-ally of the United States. So at that time, the United States was quite supportive. And also another fact, we all know that during the Vietnam War period, United States had to ship a lot of supply from Philippines. Vietnam is, the military base in Philippines, to Vietnam. That will cross the South China Sea. Every time it crosses South China Sea, they will ask the Taiwanese government, Republic of China in Taiwan, for approval. That means the United States accept the 9-dash line within its China's territory. That's a fact. And Fu Ying and Wu Shichun just published a paper to say the fact as it is. And the United States began to turn its position or change its position gradually in the 1990s. First, like you said, Soviet Union collapsed. And China stand out as a socialist country. And then in the 1990s, China and the Philippines began to have a dispute, exposed on the South China Sea. And the United States began to turn aside. But the turning point is 2010, where the United States decided to adopt a new policy called rebalance. At that time, the United States returned to Asia and then pivot or rebalance. And if you want to change your policy, have a strategic approach to this region, you need something to engage the dominant power in this region, that is China. China is present. So the United States, look, how are we going to deal with China to return Asia? I got to have a justification, an excuse, or strategic justification, not only to justify U.S. so-called return to Asia, but to enable United States to gain strategic initiatives to gain moral high ground in the region. So 4 issues United States can really engage Chinese for this possible policy goals: the Taiwan issue, South China Sea issue, North Korean nuclear weapon issue, and Tibet or Xinjiang issue. After serious consideration, they realized North Korea issue is not a good one for this purpose. Taiwan, of course, has become United States strategic liability and no longer asset. And South China Sea issue is an issue that the United States can take full advantage to engage Chinese, not only to gain strategic initiative, but to gain the moral high ground to China on the defensive side. That's why at the conference, APEC summit in Vietnam in 2010, both secretaries, Secretary Hillary Clinton and Secretary Robert Gates, made a surprise attack. They gave a speech on South China Sea. They said the United States has a commitment and credibility to peace and stability in the region. United States will uphold the freedom of navigation. United States will stop international expansion, whatever. So all of a sudden, after that, South China Sea has become a huge issue, and China is on defensive because, after all, it's the biggest country in the region, China, against 4 small countries. And second, it involves ASEAN, the only international institution in the region. Last but not the least, the status quo indeed has been changed or altered by China's fast rise.
Given the dynamics of China's fast rise in recent years, what do you think of the impact of the adversity arising from the new circumstances, particularly diplomacy on China's periphery? Now, we're engineering profound domestic transformation, social and economic alike. We need to have a peaceful surrounding, peaceful circumstances to guarantee the domestic priority. Now, President Xi Jinping has his vision and ambition to engineer transformation of the society and the party itself his own way. But we do not want to be held hostage by regional issues. What do you think of the dilemma here?
I think first and foremost, China should face reality. The reality is that many neighboring countries or neighboring areas, China does have territory dispute with other countries. This issue will not go away, will stay there. That's first. And second is that because China is developing so fast, it has to create certain degree of uncertainty. Even China does not know what China will look like 10 years from now. people feel uncertain, people feel even threatened, it's not because they are strong, because they are not predictable. In other words, countries in this area feel concerned about China, even so-called China threat, is not because China becomes stronger and stronger, because they cannot know, they cannot predict what kind of future China will bring in, either for China itself or for the region. Last but not the least, also fact, like we discussed just now, China's fast rise has changed the strategic landscape or economic landscape in the region. So people have certain concerns, serious concern, substantial concern about China's rise, China's policy. It's natural, it's understandable, and China should take a positive approach towards those concerns.
Excuse me, why?
But having said that, does not mean that China should compromise its national interests just for the peace.
Why do you take issue with unpredictability, quote unquote? China has issued more white papers and blue papers than the total number it did before the opening up. And we are involved so extensively in international multilateral meetings. We try to promote the transparency our own way, and yet China is still accused of not presenting enough certainty or predictability. Is that an issue that has been politicized by the West?
The answer is already in your question. You said in the past 10 years, China has proposed so many white papers, has engaged in so many international events, has participated in so many summits. Itself because China is growing so fast. Can you imagine 10 years ago, 20 years ago, China could play such a role in international event? So can you imagine China will be what it is today 10 years ago? So we cannot predict the future, but we can always learn from history. The history says that the speed of China's growth is so fast. No one 10 years ago can predict what China it is today.
You're right, but
now the same token, no one can predict what China will become 10 years from now. So well, China has made so many promises exactly because China's been growing so fast. When you do the home, we're all growing up from child. When was the time you did most of your homework? It's when you're in the high school, in the university. As you become more and more adult, mature, and less homework you did.
Perhaps
China is the same thing. China is a high school, college now.
But Deng Xiaoping, our late leader, says, we should keep a low profile in international affairs. Do you think this
that's a good...
This political legacy is being broken?
No, I think that being low profile, and I think it's not really a position policy, but it's take a low profile is that China should be humble. We all know historically Sun Tzu and other Chinese classical thinkers already told us this long years, the wisdom lasts for 1,000 years. That is, when you're weak, you have to appear strong and determined. That's why during Chairman Mao Zedong in the Zhou period, China is really very tough, very strong, because at that time China is weak. Being strong, being determined shows that your resolve, your pride, your determination to achieve goal. But now China is strong, and then being strong, you should be humble. Be low profile means that you're tolerant, you have an open mind, you try to achieve your goals through Wang Dao, not Ba Dao. So that's the same thing. So low profile, Tao Guang Yang Hui, does not mean, in my view, that China should do less, but means China should do things in accordance with its capability, in a more humble way. That's Tao Guang Yang Hui. Now China is stronger. It's inevitable China will have to play a bigger, more important role, and the world has to accept it. This is reality.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.